I'm Phil Needham and I'm here to make business valuations interesting. Now, if you're running your own business, I'm sure you've heard these classic words from your prospects from time to time. I could do that myself, or I could get blogs to do that for half the price, or isn't there a formula for valuing my business? The classic formula that I'm often asked about is adjusted sustainable profit times by appropriate multiple. Which is fine if you know what an adjusted sustainable profit is and how to arrive at an appropriate multiple. To begin, see if you can work out how to value each of these 6 businesses, all of which we've actually valued in the last few years. An industrial estate, a pub, a distribution business, an accountancy practice, a substantial IT consultancy, and a new invention. What's immediately apparent is that no one approach could possibly apply to all these situations. In fact, all 6 of these situations need their own technique to arrive at the correct value. Let's consider the example of an industrial estate first. The industrial estate we had to value had never made a profit of any kind in its history, and so using the classic formula, whatever the appropriate multiple, the answer would have still been nothing, and that answer would have been wrong. Of course, there was substantial value in the land and buildings of the estate, over £10 million according to a qualified surveyor. My problem was to come up with a fair value for a minority shareholder who was to be bought out. And where many valuations are quite legalistic because of tax or ownership issues, we find ourselves referring to the case books, the law books, particularly in cases of minority shareholdings. Value comes from the present value of future cash flows, and these cash flows can be from trading a business, from selling assets, or, as in the case of the industrial estate, from holding assets that are expected to grow in value. Where people get confused is how these concepts interact with each other, and there's no better example to set this out than the common example of a pub. The trick is to consider scenarios. If we sell the pub today, then we can't add a value for the trade. If we're going to continue the trade, then how do we take into account the fact that there's land and buildings which will continue to grow in value? My technique is to split out the valuation, applying a market value to the land and buildings, and then deducting a market rent from the trading profits. Only if the adjusted sustainable profit is greater than the market rent will there be any value to the trade. The third example of a distribution business is probably the only one where the classic valuation technique will apply straight off. But beware, there are different techniques for very low profits. There are a variety of rules for valuing minority shareholdings, and you need to consider if there are key personnel or if there's overdependence on one or a few customers. The valuer's art is about asking the right questions, understanding the business, and then considering future scenarios. The fourth example of the accountancy practice is an interesting one in that an accountancy practice with a turnover of 100,000 will generally sell for a single multiple of turnover or gross recurring fees. On the other hand, a one-man band consultancy practice probably won't be able to sell at all. And this is because of 2 things. The management consultancy services are generally personal to the consultant, whilst the accountancy services are, relatively speaking, a commodity product. And, secondly, the consultant will tend to have a restricted client base, whilst on the other hand, the accountancy practice will tend to have a widespread client base and, most importantly, will have repeat business. An accountancy practice therefore sells and is valued on the size and quality of its customer base. Taking the fifth example of the substantial IT consultancy, many top valuers offer their clients a value in the range of X to Y, and I tend to dismiss that as being as much use as a chocolate teapot. But in this particular case, this is exactly the answer that I came to, and I'll explain why. This was a successful IT business on the verge of becoming very successful, but the owners were losing interest. If they walk away now, they'll be lucky to get anything for the business. If they hang on and try to sell the business straight away, they might get as much as £1 million. However, if they stick it out for another 2 years, achieve their business plans, build stronger systems and put in place management structures, they should be able to get as much as 10 million. They had to decide what to do. My last example concerns guys with inventions. One of my earliest and one of my most recent valuations were for people with significant inventions, both of them facing established companies who wanted to buy them out. The technical side of the valuation concerns projecting future revenues from the invention and discounting for future risks and investment needs. There's also a practical consideration, which is how compatible will be the buyer with the seller, and that's exceedingly important. In these few minutes, I hope I've shown you that the art of business valuation is a fascinating interplay of asking the right questions, understanding the business, predicting the future, and making reasoned judgments. And it's impossible to reduce that to a formula.